All right, good afternoon, Trinidad and Tobago. Good afternoon to all the listening audience joining us on Facebook Live. Welcome to this special edition of Take a Stand for Trinidad and Tobago as we recognize the 50th anniversary of T&TEC workers joining the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, signing the first collective agreement on the 9th of October 1970. Last week, we would have started with the current vice president of OWTU responsible for T&TEC, Comrade Peter Berg, and I promised the audience that that was really part one in a series, a very important series of these sessions, whereby we talk a little bit more in detail about this entity called the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission, and of course, the people behind that public utilities. And I'm not talking about the politicians. I am not talking about management. I'm talking about the most important people behind these utilities. And of course, that being the workers themselves. And the Oilfield Workers Trade Union has been the recognized majority union for those workers in the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission for the last 50 years. And of course, as you all know, on my program, I like to really use the opportunity to educate, to inform, and to really raise consciousness about issues that sometimes appears to us to be one way, but when you look behind it and you go into more details, you see more fundamental issues coming up. This week, I am really honored to have with me in this special edition of Take a Stand, a well-known comrade in the trade union movement, and that is Comrade Alva Allen. Now, Comrade Alva Allen is no stranger to trade union issues, and certainly no stranger to T&TEC issues as it relates to the workers and T&TEC. And he will bring a vast amount of knowledge and experience coming out of some very interesting era that really laid down a very important foundation for which many of us actually enjoy. And I think one of the things you're going to really appreciate coming out of this particular interview is how certain things that would have been done have laid a foundation for us to sort of enjoy an improved quality of life. And Comrade Alva Allen would have been one of those really foundational persons who would have set a sort of standard for how we as the working class can really emancipate ourselves from exploitation. It's a real honor for me because I have known Alva since I came into the movement some 10 or 11 years ago, so I'm really a baby compared to him. And he has always really impressed me with two things. One, his vast amount of knowledge and experience, but the second thing, which I think is even more important, his willingness to share. This comrade no matter what it is, I could always go to him to ask him a question, to get advice, and he's always so willing to share. And I think we in Trinidad and Tobago are actually fortunate to have persons like that who would have made a significant contribution to national development. He was the former labor relations officer for OWTU, longtime active member in the trade union movement, and he's currently a lecturer at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. It's my pleasure to introduce to you none other than Comrade Alva Allen. Good afternoon, Comrade Allen.
Hi, Comrade. How are you going?
Good to see you, man. Although it's only virtual, but I think it's really good to have you on this special edition, this special program.
Thank you very much.
Now, as I said, Comrade Allen, I'd like to start by saying that history is very important because sometimes we come into a situation where as workers into a workplace and so on, and we meet certain things and we meet certain benefits, and we really don't appreciate how those benefits came to be. And they were not gifts from either God or management. They are the culmination of very long, difficult struggles. So I'm really happy to have you on this program, and I really want this program to be a sort of a conversation. We're having a nice conversation about T&TEC the struggles of the electricity workers, and of course, what does that mean for the wider working class? So welcome, and may I ask you to just give a little bit more background? I give a synopsis, but if you can give a little more background in terms of yourself.
Wow. Well, I'll have to cut it short.
Otherwise, that might take up the whole program.
Yes, this year is my 48th year in the trade union movement. I began in 1972 when I joined the T&TEC as a worker and became an acting shop steward by the end of that year. From since then to now, my entire life has been spent with the trade union movement. I served as a shop steward. I became the branch secretary, extra delegate. I have held several positions in the branch. I eventually became a labor relations officer by around 1983 or thereabouts. Right? And I stayed with the OWTU for about till 1997, 25 years actually. And as an officer of the OWTU, I was invited to serve on the executive of the Council of Progressive Trade Unions. I served as the Assistant General Secretary of the CPTU, and that was around 1986. While serving at the CPTU, I was asked to serve on the National Insurance Board as a labor director, one of three. Right, and that started from around 1987 to about 2010 or thereabouts. I also served on the legal aid, several other state boards, legal aid and advisory committee, NTS, and so on. I then served as the recording secretary for the Joint Trade Union Movement in 1987, 88, 89. In the build-up to the formation of the NATOC in 1991, I became the Assistant General Secretary of the National Trade Union Center and served in that capacity for several years. I went on to become the Deputy General Secretary. And then after that, well, I had left OWTU and went over to work in NUGFW. I was Director of Education, Research, Planning, Training, and Development, and a whole host of other functions. I stayed there with them for some time. I also served as the union's lead negotiator for WASA negotiations, and that was very instructive because that gave me the opportunity to bring to bear all the experience and knowledge I gained working in the OWTU, and especially among T&TEC workers, because when I went to WASA, you know, they were demanding parity with T&TEC rates of pay. And I was given the responsibility to lead that negotiations, and we in fact got the government to agree to bring WASA in line with WASA's rates of pay, in line with T&TEC rates of pay. So, and also, well, for the first time, we got WASA to agree to the introduction of a medical plan, right? And I was responsible for that negotiation. Again, using the experience I had from the OWTU in T&TEC and the central and local government, the related workers, I led the negotiations for the introduction of the medical plan, right? Largely relying on what I had gained in knowledge for 25 years in OWTU. So other workers benefited from that. Right? I stayed with NUGFW for some years. I then went over to BIGW where I stayed for a few years, about 10 years or so, I think. Yeah, about that. And I worked as the union's education and research coordinator. And having retired from there earlier on this year, I was asked to come and join up with the National Workers Union. In the interim, I have been a lecturer at the Cipriani College of Labor for about 9-10 years. Don't remember the exact amount. But during that period as well, I had served as labor's representatives on several cabinet appointed committees like pension reform, health sector reform, and so on. So that's as best as I could try to condense it.
Well, I'm sharing my screen and you gave me permission. So Yeah, Trinidad and Tobago, you would see Alva Allen in his heydays with his fro. He is the center photo, flanked by two other comrades, which we will talk a little bit more about a little later. But I just thought I'd share a little visual. So when we talk about, when we get into the details about those days and the struggle and so on, people have a sense of your youthful appearance in those days. So there we have Comrade Alva Allen. This is a photo that would have been taken in the early 80s, and we'll talk a little bit more as we get into some details around those struggles. So I just thought I'd share that. So let's get into the meat of the matter, Comrade Allen, and let's just talk T&TEC. When you got into T&TEC, what was it like, and really what would have made you as a young man entering the commission saw it necessary to be involved in really fighting for the T&TEC workers?
Well, my entry into T&TEC was preceded by my involvement as a student in the what we call the Black Power movement in 1970. I remember vividly running away from school together with Jerry Kangari, who was an education officer in the union, and many other colleagues from school, whom you might know, like Michael Adams and so on. And we used to go and join the Black Power marches. One of our teachers in St. Mary's College, Pat Clark, he devoted a lot of time towards uplifting our political consciousness in school, right? So that gave me a different perspective in life by the time I had joined T&TEC in 1972. I didn't stay any length of time before joining the union because I was on probation, and when I was confirmed, I joined, and shortly after that, the workers, I used to chat a lot with the workers, talk to them, right? 1972 was a very trying time in Trinidad and Tobago. That was when we had the involvement of a number of young men and women from the working class. Right? One or two of them, like John Beda, I went to school with him at St. Mary's. They were involved in the guerrilla movement. So as a political activist at the time, I engaged in lively discussions with my colleagues at work. And the shop steward there sad to say he wasn't performing. So they immediately asked me to serve as shop steward, and they petitioned the union, asking the union to let me serve as a shop steward. And that is how I started in the Oil Field Workers Trade Union as a unionist. Now, the period of 1972 going forward, right? It was not a calm period. It was not a peaceful period. It was one of intense battles against the board and management of T&TEC. That is what I met when I came into T&TEC, and here we had the workers, right, calling for the removal of the chairman of the board, Sir Alan Rees. And they were accusing him of quite a number of things like mismanagement and so on. For example, the purchase of the two generators that the workers termed Chief Crazy Horse and Chief Sitting Bull. They never worked, and millions of dollars were spent, right? So the responsibility for that ultimately lay with the chairman, and they called on him to resign, right? And the workers intensified the struggle. North and South used to come. Don't talk about South. Them South workers would win some das. Well, those were really the days, you know, when they come down and talk, they say heat up the picket line, you know? And they really joined together and united as a force to demand the removal of the chairman of the board for the purchase of those two bad generators, right? And the wastage of funds, millions of dollars that were spent on buying them. So that was the era I came in, one of intense struggle for what George Weeks had described, moving T&TEC as a public utility to become a people's utility. Not that it would be owned only by the people, but it must be managed in the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. There must be
Right.
no mismanagement of the funds, there must be no corruption, and so on. And the workers were waging relentless battles against that. At the same time that they called for Ilaris to go, right? They were also calling for one of the subsequently one of the industrial relations managers. That's what we used to call them long time. Urias Forbes. He was Dr. No-Go. When negotiations started at 000, and they sit down, they negotiated whole night on a 000. And the workers became fed up when they were hearing reports on their officers, their representatives, that the commission is not moving. And they didn't want that, right? They wanted to take action and get rid of him one time. If he want a separate negotiation, wait, right? And they launched a battle and they got rid of him too, you know. Yes,
Okay.
the riot forces was thrown out at T&TEC. In fact, one night, while the union officers were waiting for him in his office, right, he locked them up in the office, locked them in, turned the key, locked the door. Nobody could come out. And the next, so the president, Horace Lowry and Mings and all them, they had to stay there.
Right.
Uh, and next morning, 7 o'clock, they made a call down to the distribution yard and tell the workers that how the manager had locked them in his office. And if you see the
Yes.
truck coming up, oh God, it was a sight to behold. I mean, I was now growing up in the union and experiencing these things as a young officer. There were others who were much older than me, right? And seeing this site was really gave me a lot of vibes and enthusiasm to fight. And the workers come and they break open the office and they free the officers. And from that day, right, I think Falls must have spent about 2-3 days in office before he finally tendered his resignation and left, right? They bring
Yeah.
on a next industrial relations manager right after, I think his name was Patrick Bino. Yes, Patrick Bino. This is one of the lessons I learned. Workers don't take shit for long. Pardon the language, but they wouldn't tolerate it for long, right? Patrick Bino had introduced or wanted to introduce some system to monitor the typists in the typing pool, a time on motion study. I think that, yes, that is what it was. And because the typists, some of them were white people, the supervisor was white, for sure. One of the typists was also white. Right? No offense against color, but understand how the workforce was at the time. And these typists put on the foot, they said they're not going to get involved in that. You have to talk to the union, right? And negotiate this thing. Bino insists here doing that. Well, boy, he suspend all the typing pool operators, suspend them. And you see the lesson I learned in T&TEC, I could never ever forget that. The distribution workers who were daily paid hourly paid workers,
Yes.
and the typists were monthly paid. You know what those workers said? You touch one of it, you touch all of it. And they mounted a campaign to get Britain out of T&TEC. Well, the matter ended up in the Ministry of Labour before the end of the week. And Desmond Carty, who was Minister of Labour, asked Ashton Britain, he said, how long are you working in T&TEC? You sure you want to get your pension? Tears in the eye. Tears in the eye. He signed the agreement to reinstate all the workers who were suspended, everyone. Right? And it was that solidarity that is so, I can't tell you when last I see something like that in 2020, 2019, the workers standing up for one another, not on bread and butter issues, you know, right? Not on salary negotiations, right? But when somebody gets fired or disciplined and so on, and it's unjustified, workers say, well, we go put down the foot and protest against it. No, that era, after Brayton left, they bring a next one, Patrick Bino. Well, they got rid of him too, because he didn't want to settle negotiations either. And the workers, T&TEC workers went and picket Patrick Bino's house. First time, lunchtime. Well, we had to read out to the workers their rights to picket.
Yeah.
The employer's home. It is provided for in law.
Yeah.
But the workers were a bit scared about it. And his home was actually next to the distribution compound on Flanders Street, opposite you. So they went over there at lunchtime and they started to picket. Right? But Bino started to get real pressure now. He wasn't home for lunch. And you know, we had to bring an end to the picket because we heard a report that his mother was suffering with her heart. And nobody wanted to be responsible for anything untoward. But the campaign against Bino, right, for the kind of proposals that he was bringing in the negotiation, you want to imagine this man want to fire people because he's saying that if you borrow money from an ex-worker, it's an offense, a punishable offense. So if I broke one time, me have no money, I will pass it to come to work, I can't borrow from you. That is an offense. Well, boy, he and all was made to leave and left. So we have had a struggle against that poor type of industrial relations practice. You wanted to ask something.
You know, it's so fascinating hearing these stories because, for one, they are not fairy tales. These are real stories of real people who engage in a real battle for justice in a real way. Now, three things jump out at me. One is this, what I would call motto of moving T&TEC from a public utilities to people's utilities. I think that is a very powerful message. And to say quite frankly, I think it's even relevant for today. And the next thing that jumped out at me is the fact that the union was the one pressing the commission to be more efficient. Because, you know, the way in which the state and its sort of allies, the capitalist class and their allies sort of spin it, is always spinning away as though the union somehow is against efficiency. When from what you are saying, based on that historical fact, that it was the union that was pushing for T&TEC to be less corrupt, to be more efficient, and to really be a reliable utility for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, what I hear coming out from you is that in those foundational days, the T&TEC workers saw themselves as being part of this wider national community, whereby this utility, which is an important and critical utility, electricity, they want to make sure that their brothers and sisters across the country will have a reliable supply of electricity. And that goes a very long way, because one of the things that I found when I was doing my little research leading up to this particular interview is the submission of the union to the Public Utilities Commission. So can you just share with us a little bit, what was this Public Utilities Commission about, and the contribution that the union through the experience and knowledge of the workers themselves contributed to that process?
Ozzy, you are taxing my brain and my memory.
Sorry, I'm just trying to take advantage of it as I have you here now.
Well, you have to remember, I am older, so I couldn't remember every single thing. Right? My brain and memory is not as crisp as it used to be in my much younger days. But let me see. In the early 1980s, right, we were calling for a people's utility. The call itself was really coined by the President General Comrade Weeks. Right? We have been arguing as a union for national ownership of the commanding heights of the economy. Mm-hmm. We had achieved that to a significant extent. Right? But what we were witnessing with the enterprises that we own, for example, T&TEC, is not what we envisaged, is not what we intended by national ownership. We wanted these enterprises to be properly run in the interest of the people. Nobody contemplated that the enterprise or the utility would be a nesting home for the retired party hacks. You know,
Yes.
that is not what we intended.
Right.
Nobody intended that payback time will come after election and everybody will have a contract to fix a pool. So our jobs were being taken away from us, given to contractors. When we check the financial statements, it's millions of dollars being paid to contractors, and to do what? When we tell the Public Utilities Commission, you see half the poles they plant, them contractors plant, it was not to the specified depth. Right? The pole rotten on the ground, line burst. People complaining and they blaming we. They blaming us. When it was the management that was responsible for that. So all that we were saying to the PUC, we end up being vindicated. The PUC supported us. That the problem was management and how the utility was being managed. And that is where we said that we need to have a say in how things are being organized and how they are being run. The union must be involved in that process. The workers in all the compounds, north, south, east, Tobago, everywhere, they must be involved in the decision-making process in T&TEC. And that is what we call for. That is what we meant by moving from a public utility to a people's utility, so that the interests of the people could best be served, right, with our getting involved in the decision-making to ensure that it is properly managed, to ensure, as we used to put in all our letters, the words are viable, reliable, and efficient utility. Weeks used to put that in all his letters to T&TEC, everyone. Because that is what we wanted.
Come on, sorry to interject, because I don't want this point to be lost on people. Can you please repeat once again, what were those 3 words that were always in the President General's letters to T&TEC from back then? What were those 3 words? Can you just repeat it? I think I wanted to sink in that this is the union speaking, okay? This is not politicians speaking. This is not some expert from, you know, I don't know whether to find them. This is not some newspaper editorial. This is the union. You know, just can you share that once again with Trinidad and Tobago?
Towards a viable, reliable, and efficient utility. That was the union's philosophy. That is how we envisaged T&TEC should be. We drew to their attention that they come into ask a rates increase. To do what? You're producing electricity back in 1980, 86, 88, somewhere around there, right? And I think the cost of it was about, I can't remember the exact amount, must be about 18 cents a unit back then, production costs. And you're selling it to ISPAT for 6 cents a unit. Oh gosh, man, when we complained to the PUC, you know, that
just for clarification to the listening audience, ISPAT was the steel company back in the 80s. Just so the audience have an idea, who is ISPAT? You know,
It was a state enterprise and then sold over to foreign investors, right? How come domestic customers' total usage of electricity, right, is less than industrial? They're using more. But the revenue from domestic is greater than the revenue from industrial. So we using more, we using less and paying more.
Right.
They're using more and paying less. That is not what a public utility is supposed to do.
You know,
and if the workers had a say in how this thing was being organized and structured, that could have never happened.
And you know, it is what you're saying is so important. I'm really happy we're having this interview because it's all this sort of psychological, you know, games that the ruling class play on us. So what you are saying, and you know, it hasn't changed from then till now. It's the same thing. So you have the industries, big multinational, like well, with foreign investments. That, as you said, it was state, but then it became there were foreign investors.
Petchem was another beneficiary of that.
That FedChem, and we could name quite a few. And right now, you have the BP, BHP, and all of that. So you have huge industries benefiting or paying less, even though they're using more. Collectively, we mean, right? Not necessarily as an individual unit, right? But the point is that you hear this sort of story coming at it, and you see it even now in some commentaries in the newspapers and so on, to make the domestic user, you and I, ordinary working people, feel guilty because they say, you know, the electricity in Trinidad and Tobago is one of the lowest in the world, and they're not talking to the industries about that, you know. They're not directing that statement to big business and huge industries and multinationals. They would have directed that message to ordinary working people. So I thought that we, you know, sort of reiterate that fundamental point, because they will have us believe and then join with them in accusing ourselves towards paying more rate in order to offset really the loss which is incurred because of the rates given to, or the revenue derived from the big business and industries. Did I capture it correctly?
Yes. A close colleague of mine, his name is Roland Brigham. He was the investigator from the Public Utilities Commission. He had interviewed myself, Ramco, and others, right, on the issues at T&TEC. And what he had explained to us was that, well, we didn't know, right, is that the utility had operated on what they called an inverted rate. The more you use, the less you pay. If you look at your light bill now, you will see the more consumption, the cheaper the cost of the unit of electricity. Well, obviously, we all know who will use more. And what was being explained to us at the time too was that was part of the government's investment policy to win foreign enterprise to come and invest here.
Industrialization by invitation?
Yes. Arthur Lewis strategy. Now that you talk about it, yes, you're quite correct. You're quite correct. But again, at that time, I was very young, so I had to grapple with all those concepts, but I could still remember some of it. But basically, that the concept of a people's utility is what the union had stood for. And T&TEC dared us. They challenged us because they were really in a monkey pants, right? With criticism all over the place. And the general manager at the time was Stanley.
I think you may have had a little internet drop there, Comrade Allen. So you may have to repeat that. I think that's a slight, yeah. All right, we seem to be having a slight internet issue with Comrade Allen, but I'm sure he'll just come back on in a little bit. So as we wait for him to return, I think you are getting a really good picture of how the union viewed T&TEC in terms of a people's utility. And I think that is a very powerful statement. Comrade Allen, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
All right,
For
great.
one reason, we seem to be getting disconnected, but whatever. We try and proceed as best as we can.
No, so far you're back on track and you're sounding. You just have to put back on your your video, but so far so good.
Okay, video. All right. Let me get it for you.
Sure. The powers that be don't want us to spread this message. Come on, Alan.
Well, the
All right,
truth
go
can
ahead.
never be hidden for long. The records are there. The records are there. Stanley Otley invited the union. Well, all they're talking about people's utility and all they're talking about being able to come up with ideas on how to solve the problems. Okay, you're going to form a task force, union and management, equal representatives, right? And they invited the union to nominate some people to serve on the task force. I think the union's delegation at the time was led by this guy, Sylvester Ramqua. Right? What I remembered coming out of the task force was some of the recommendations, right? One of the recommendations was in terms of maintenance work for the generators. T&TEC would have planned in advance when they would bring down a generator for maintenance. And what we discovered was that when the generator comes down, they then order in spare parts. It's taking months for the things to be. So why don't you order the items that you know you will need and stock it in bulk in the storage yard? For God's sake, it don't require no bachelor's degree to do that. Well, they scratch the head. And that was the report that went to the membership. I wasn't there in the meeting, but it's in the report, right? But you know, you think they didn't think about it. A simple thing like that, so that you'll have less downtime of the machine, and it will be able to come back up in order to provide a greater amount of kilowatt hours for the country. So you'll have more machines available to supply. And that was just one. It had many others that the union had proposed, but in the report, the management under Otley praised the union, never one day thought that the union had the interests of T&TEC at heart. That was the most touching part of the report. Forget everything else. But they finally admitted, right? Finally admitted in black and white that the Oilfield Workers Trade Union had the interests of T&TEC at heart and was able to come up with a substantial amount of recommendations that were worthy of consideration. And the recommendations went for approval to the board. A lot of the recommendations were in fact approved by the board.
Yes, which give credence to your point about workers having more say in the running of the utility, greater ownership and control of the means of production, and that's what I hear you saying in terms of the value of that.
Yes, it belongs to all of us.
Yeah,
we have no interest in seeing it run down and mismanaged.
That is correct. Now, you in our earlier discussion, not on this live, but I want to put it to you to mention it in this live, because I think it's such an important term that you mentioned to me earlier in our conversation around this issue of workers having a greater say in the running of the facility. I don't know if you remember, it was industrial democracy. That I will not take credit for it. That was what Comrade Alva Allen told me this morning. I think it was this morning. So can you just, I mean, you hinted to it, but I think it's such an important concept, this idea of industrial democracy. And it's very advanced thinking, very progressive. Can you just speak a little bit more to this concept and how really and truly the people of Trinidad and Tobago can benefit from greater industrial democracy in the country?
Right. We wanted to be involved in the decision-making process for T&TEC, so that in 2020, we would jointly sit down and plan what is T&TEC going to do for those areas of the country that do not have electricity. Have a general plan for the year, right? That was the proposal, you know, because we knew the terrain, we knew which areas are out, they can't afford, and so on. What can we do to assist to ensure that these people and their children have a supply? Right? T&TEC managers in the office cannot do that because they don't know out there. Another thing, in terms of planning for the year to come, what are the things that we need to put in place, right, so that the plans that we agree on can materialize? Do we have the available manpower? Do we have the available infrastructure such as vehicles and so on? Because we had quite a number of vacancies in T&TEC.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that led to the strike in 1982 was the vacancies that existed in the T&TEC power stations. Right? And people had to forego the vacation leave. 100 days piling up, and people can't get vacation leave. It's short staff. And one of the reasons why it was short staff was because operators were leaving to go and work in ISCOT because the rates of pay were higher. Right? So in terms of manpower, in terms of vehicles, in terms of equipment and so on, what are the things that we need to have upfront so that we can make all these plans be materialized? That is the way we wanted to go.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Now, I want to come to you a little bit more, if you don't mind. As you mentioned that struggle of 82, just to share with Trinidad and Tobago that you are not just speaking rhetorically, but you yourself would have had to make certain sacrifices. And let me just allow me here to pull up another screen. This would have been when you all would have been charged. And we'll talk a bit about that. You're not going to get away, Comrade Allen. So this is front page of the Union's newspaper of the time, 1981. Is that 81? 82. 1982.
Yeah.
Dismissed, arrested, and charged by the state. T&TEC workers' historic struggle. Let us just talk about that period, Comrade Allen. What led to the arrest? How long were you all? I know it's not just you. I know you always state that it's not about an individual or a leader, it's about the collective. So can you just share a little bit about that historic workers, T&TEC workers struggle?
Young man, why you so? What you going to put up with?
I am enjoying myself, Comrade Allen.
Oh gosh, boy. Well, let me see. I must have been around 29 years old at the time.
Wow.
Very young. Yeah. That struggle in 1982 was to ensure that T&TEC workers get what we call wage justice. We can't be putting our life, yes, we can't be putting our lives on the line and be underpaid. So we made a demand, right, to enjoy equal rates with the oil industries, and in particular with ISPAT, right? I think the call that we were making was $10 an hour. T&TEC at the time in the country, the recession was on, world recession taking place. It started in 1981, and government was not giving in on nothing. Nobody was getting any increases. But we know that we never entered into a fight and come out empty-handed. So we knew that we were going to end up in a fight with T&TEC over this one, right? Just as much as T&TEC itself was preparing for that fight. So the workers were being mobilized in all the branches, and that is a feature that, you know, I am so sad to say that it is absent in the movement today, the mobilization of workers on an ongoing basis. But anyway, that is that. But the workers were being mobilized and getting ready to engage T&TEC into a battle to get this negotiation settled in their favor. And what happened was that the Minister of Labor, when we went to the Ministry of Labor, the negotiations didn't settle bilaterally with T&TEC, so we ended up in the Ministry of Labor. And the Minister of Labor told another union team that was there at the same time, well, talks break down. This time we're still talking, but talks break down. They had planned the thing properly, man. They had planned it. Yeah, and arising out of the breakdown in talks, the matter was to go before the industrial court. Well, the workers say, well, yeah, talks break down. Well, that is the only thing that will break down. If they don't want to settle, well, okay, we'll deal with that. And the workers decided that they're going to engage T&TEC in that fight. The Minister of Labor then went and get an injunction, El Mahabir, he went and get an injunction to restrain us from taking industrial action, and they started to serve it on workers in the distribution north. Yeah, that morning I was there, and the workers decided, well, you could fight the injunction, you could serve the injunction. We will do what we had to do. So said, so done. And the workers decided to put up a resistance that I have never ever seen before. Nor decided that they would stop work, and they called on all the other T&TEC branches to join them, right, in defiance of the injunction. Well, the following week, I had visited all the other T&TEC branches that Monday morning and invited them to come down into Port of Spain. Well, I told you, when I reached Central, I told them what was happening in town. San Fernando, Reese was there talking to the workers. I told them, well, we're having this solidarity rally. We're going to stand up, right? And so on. All the branches, Penal, I went to Penal and so on. I met with Ashton Harilal. I can't forget Ashton, right? And from Penal down to Rio Claro, up to Rima, and come back down into town that evening for the rally. But by that time, T&TEC had already fired several of the power station operators for not reporting for work, and they suspended about 7 of them. About 12 people were out on the line, right? And they had decided to pitch cancel. That was told to all the workers when we had visited the branches. But this was crunch time, and this is the moral to me in that whole story. What do? You push me back up against a wall. You fire 12 people. What do you want me to do? I could only do one thing, go forward and fight. I cannot surrender at this stage. That will not happen. That was the mood of the T&TEC workers. Because nobody was going to allow T&TEC to send them operators out on the breadline just so. They was working in the most atrocious conditions. Imagine people can't get vacation leave 100 days pile up. They're working bareback in the power station. No, we are taking that. So we decided when the rally came off that evening that all of we going out on this thing together as one unit. You touch one, you touch all of them. Right? And we decided to brave the odds. The union did, as a union, it did what it had to do. It called together the trade union federations, Labour Congress, and so on. They said they will support us, right? But the government was on the offensive. Fire them, fire them. If they want to go back to fire them, get other people. John Epstein calling for blood. Well, he could call for we want. We decided to take a stand. But Cabinet had met in Toko, as I remember, and they decided that if we don't go back to work, they declare a state of emergency. Well, you know what happened? I did not tell you. The Labour Congress decided to back out them and make a no deal. So we realized that the support from the trade unions was lost, right? And it didn't make any further sense because we were without support. So we decided, we agreed down at a meeting down at Seaman Hall that we'd go back into work Monday, and the negotiations, we'll sort out that in court together with the dismissals, everybody. But What was also important to understand was that they arrested and charged Vernon Reese for inciting strike in the South. Emerson Moons, he was the president of North. That was a good partner too, right? He was also arrested and charged. He was also fired too, right? Reese was also dismissed. Murray was suspended. Nothing, Murray was dismissed, right? I was suspended when we went back out of work. Malcolm Kingston and them come and arrest me by my desk and take me down to headquarters and say you're under arrest for inciting strike. And that didn't panic anybody. That didn't drive no fear into anybody's heart. We know that sooner or later this thing has to continue, and sooner or later we will be victorious because we're not allowing T&TEC to do us what they have done. That is not going to happen.
Yeah.
So we were quite confident in ourselves, even though, well, some of the odds were stacked up against us. But the thing about it is that the industrial court ordered the reinstatement of all the dismissed workers. Every union officer who was fired was ordered to be reinstated. They said T&TEC broke all the rules of natural justice. All the power station operators were ordered back to work. In addition to that, the negotiation itself, imagine the Attorney General first time in the history of negotiation intervened in the negotiation at the industrial court and arguing for us to get 000. That was telling you clear where the government was going nationally across the board in terms of all negotiations. Because if they could break the anti-court, then everybody else would jump and follow suit. That is what they wanted to achieve. Well, they didn't achieve that. The court ordered an increase of 50% for the T&TEC workers, the biggest increase we ever got, right? From the biggest fight we ever fought. What was significant about it is that that increase served as a benchmark for everybody else. You see, it was not a struggle for we alone. It was a struggle for everybody. And that is how we were galvanizing public opinion. If we win, all will win, for sure. And so said, so done. You know, WASA workers, when I worked in NUGFW, they were demanding to get on par with T&TEC rates, and they got it. They actually got it. They had to fight the way. I also remember Lyle Townsend. Well, in those days, we used to talk pretty good. We were comrades in arms, right? And Lyle, I sat down with him, I explained him all the salary increases that we received and so on. And he was able to take a page out of that to use that to bolster telco rates up to the level of where T&TEC is. And that's how they reached there, because everybody benefited from that. Even today, right? People will compare, will look how much a clerk tree in T&TEC with 5 levels is getting compared to me as a supervisor in a bank. But sacrifices were made. It was a real fight. The workers were united. And we lost lives, you know. In that struggle, I have to mention those lives that were lost. Punwalsi Ramuta from the Port of Spain B power station, lived in Pinal.
Can you repeat that name?
Punwalsi Ramuta. He was one of the dismissed power station operators. Right? And another comrade who was traveling from his home to the campsite in Central, he got into an accident. I can't remember his name. Sylvester Johnston then would be able to recall his name, but he died in a vehicular accident as well. So we lost good soldiers, right? But at the end of the day, the reward was there for the effort that we put in to get what we have. And that is how we have what we have today. It didn't come because the union begged and put up argument. I mean, if it's one thing that the union always taught us growing up in OWTU, if I can't convince you by the power of my arguments, I will convince you by the arguments of my power.
Yes.
And that is what we all believe, and that is what we practice. Right? How true that holds today, well, that's a different story.
Yes.
But
Sorry,
yes,
go
okay,
ahead.
go ahead. No, you go ahead. You are the host.
Right. I just
I
want
don't
to.
want
No, I think it was a very powerful story, because what I hear you saying is that historic T&TEC struggle, and I mean that would have been one of several, but the point about it, it is part or connected to this wider nationalistic struggle for two things: improving the service of supply of electricity so that all um, all citizens can benefit, and secondly, improving the quality of life of all workers. And I think that is very critical for people to grasp, and really appreciate and understand that many of the benefits we really have is from those bitter struggles that you all would have engaged in. And we can't take it for granted. As you said, there were comrades who lost their lives. There were comrades who would have had to, I sure it had plenty of comrades who would have lost their families in those bitter struggles, lost their homes, lost their vehicles, lost so many, just so that we can have, that future generations can have at least a better quality of life. And I think that that is most profound. Now, one of the things that you were mentioning to me earlier, and I think it's important, you started it just a while ago, is you were talking to me about the collective contribution of workers, and to really, you wanted to pay tribute, because this special edition is about tribute to the electricity workers, and you wanted to put, give some credit to the foot soldiers in terms of their militancy and so on. So I would like you to sort of mention them now before I go to one sort of last topic in terms of broadening our little discussion here about the fact that as we look at 2020, hearing that story that you told, you're talking about the early 80s, you're talking about 40 years ago. But today in 2020, you have employers who are not even doing the most basic thing of paying workers NIS. So I want to sort of close off with that, but I want you to use the opportunity and platform to pay tribute to those foot soldiers who would have really, struggled and sacrificed for all of us, those of us in the OWTU, those of us who are a part of the wider trade union movement, and to every single worker, whether you're working in a retail outlet, whether you're working in a factory, or wherever. I want you to use the platform for that now.
I was 19 years old as a shop steward. I didn't reach 20 yet. But when I joined, the stories I heard of our former heroes and legends of the time coming from T&TEC was something else. I could call a few names. I can't call all because the time would finish. We had Winston Das from T&TEC San Fernando, powerhouse organizer. He served on the executive. He was a treasurer of the union. At one time, we had Dennis Thomas, who was also an executive officer from T&TEC Tobago. I had Brian Harry from T&TEC Tobago, our branch president. Right? And coming up Arima side now, don't laugh at this one. Right? Please. My father-in-law, deceased, Dennis Charles. Right? Well, I got married to his daughter, Barbara. She's working in the union's Porter-Spain office.
Yes.
But Dennis was the president of the T&TEC Arima branch.
Okay.
Yes. And when he retired from T&TEC, they took him on as a labor relation officer, and he used to service the small branches up on the Arima side, like national canners and so on, right? Um, then we had many others like, well, we come into the big guns now, Horace Nore. Nothing could be complete without mentioning names like Horace Nore. I mean, if there's one lesson I learned from Horace, we used to fight it. We used to fight one another. Oh God, every but he was my friend. He was my good friend. When he got in the accident, I was by his bedside all the time, right? And one of the things I had learned from him was that when you're going in to do negotiations, when you're going to handle grievances, you sit your butt down and prepare yourself properly.
Mm.
He was very, very thorough. And he explained to me why he used to be so thorough and meticulous. He would say, Alva, you know why I'm doing this? Because somebody's job is in my hands. You don't mess with it. So you put your best foot forward. Why? Because somebody's job and your wife and your children in your hands. That is why he used to take his time to be meticulous. And he sat down and explained that to me. That was one of the things that he was very good. Another thing that he was noted for was the contribution that he made to bringing about the achievement of equal rates for equal pay for women in the East-West corridor starting at CPI. Few people know about that.
Okay.
Few people know about that.
Okay.
But he has to be recognized for his contribution, right? And after he got into the accident and he was out for several months in coma and so on. And when he got back up, he really couldn't perform. Right? Weeks had asked him if he still wanted to go on the executive. He said, I can't. And so they asked Sylvester Ramqua to sub in, to come in and serve as an executive. Well, Ramqua was Mr. Fire himself, Mr. Innovator of ideas. And one of the greatest contributions that he had made was the establishment of the employee home ownership plan using pension funds. He won that fight for workers to control what happens with their pension fund investments. The very first of its kind, and after that, other branches of the union started to engage in negotiations for employee home ownership plans and so on, like T&TEC and NP and that kind of thing. Right? So that was one of his input. I mean, he was a master blaster in pensions. No two ways about that. Nobody could talk about it. Right? So I had learned from all of them. I paid tribute to all of them. Right? When I had left, I had passed over the reins to Harrison Thompson to make his contribution. He was an executive trustee at the time. He says, I was in charge of the negotiation. He's the executive trustee. He's sitting down at the end of the table, but I in charge. I said, no, you see, that's other stuff. He's executive, you see, no next to me. Right? I'm not going to be here forever. So you have to take the reins just now. Because I told the branches I would only stay for 5 years, no more. 5 years came, and that was it. I left. So I allowed him to grow, to take part in the negotiations and so on, to make his contribution and so on. So Thompson was one, and then after him, together with him was people like Gilbert Taylor and so on. But those were some of then they had Roland from T&TEC Arima. Those are some of the executive officers that we have produced in the OWTU, right? Some, not all. Branch officers. I will never ever forget Sylvester Johnson and Andrew Alsby, because they were the ones who took me out from T&TEC head office, put me to stand up in the picket line and learn how to chant. Keith Murray, Ashton Harilal from T&TEC Penal branch president, Faizul Nayamat, McDonald Gerald from T&TEC Rio Claro, Moving Codrington and Jack from T&TEC San. They were real foot soldiers, you know. You had Andrew George and Lakshmi Prasad from Arima and so on. But You know, in the branch where I came from, Port of Spain, right? We also had our foot soldiers. I cannot publicly disclose the contributions that they made, but the contributions that they made gave us the power that we enjoy. There are people like VATS,
Come
Father
on,
Christmas.
sorry, you took off your video by mistake.
Oh, okay.
So
Just
go
another,
over, yeah,
yeah,
right.
some of the
Okay,
foot
go over
soldiers
the
in
list from Port of Spain. Yes.
like Port of Spain branch, right? When them talk in the yard listen. People like VATS, right? Father Christmas. His son today is a Union officer, Charles, right? Yeah, the Rasta, young
Yeah.
boy, yeah, his son. But the kind of contribution that they made is what gave us our bargaining power. And I don't want to spell it out for obvious reasons. But they have to be recognized. Then you had Zaz. Zaz was the man who really organized workers to join the union, you know. And he was a vice president of the branch first time, right? And he was, well, one of the big heavyweights in NJAC in 1970, right? And at that time, you had people like Norbert and Ronald Laurie. Don't talk about Laurie. Laurie was one of the comrades together with Cliff Thomas who would organize workers from the yard. If our brothers have a strike, we go in and visit the camp. We go sit down and we go line with them, we go play all force with them, we keep them company. Them is we comrades. That was Laurie. That was Cliff. That's what he used to do. Organize solidarity, right? By bringing out workers to join them, right? Um, in the later years, we also had people like Spanner and Garaway and so on. And well, today we have Peter Book. His father and I used to work together in T&TEC officer.
Ah, okay.
Yes, I know that quite well. It doesn't really reveal my age, but those are some of the names that I wanted to make mention of and pay tribute to, right? Obviously, for time, I can't talk about every single body. Well, other people could chime in and so on and talk about other foot soldiers and their branches and so who really made tremendous contributions.
Yes. I mean,
You
that was,
wanted to talk about the NIS thing,
yes. But just
right?
before you go to the NIS, I really want to thank you for that, because so often history tends to be written about uh, personalities and not about class. And by mentioning these foot soldiers and the contribution that these comrades all made collectively has had a significant impact on Trinidad and Tobago. Many people may not know it, they may not even realize that connection. And it is very important for us as a people to recognize the stories of heroes and heroines, ordinary men and women who rose to a challenge in order to bring about justice. And that is powerful. These are our heroes. We don't have to turn to Hollywood or to the US or to Europe to find heroes. They are right here in Trinidad and Tobago. And I really thank you for sharing those names with Trinidad and Tobago this afternoon. I thought I had to talk about how important it was before we moved to the final issue of the NIS payment. And let me, in my own way, on behalf of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, also recognize all those soldiers, all those T&TEC heroes and heroines who have helped made this union as strong as it is and have helped make Trinidad and Tobago as developed as it is.
Thank you. It is much appreciated. I'm sure all workers will appreciate that gesture for me. The NIS, well, in the old days when NIS had now started, uh, um, what they used to do was buy stamps. You had a card, instead of paying the money directly, you had to buy the stamp and you put it on the card, right? And there was this guy who was contracted to do that function. Well, he buy a set of outdated stamps, usually, and the cards were never up to date. He was pocketing the money. You know, it stopped, and T&TEC stopped contracting out that work, which was a function of the payroll department, right? And although his son is still in business as some NIS consultant, I don't want to call him name, right? But people might know. There was a report on this thing, the scam that went on with those NIS stamps. It was tabled in Parliament. I remember being told that by Jeffrey McFarlane, who was executive director in NIB, right, about all this money that was taken and never reached NIB, supposedly to have bought stamps and never purchased. But surprising to see that, you know, up to today, employers are deducting and still not remitting. It's an offense against the law. The NIS Act say is if you do that, is $4,000 in fine and 6 months in jail. It's a criminal offense. Look, NIB in their reports say they collect $500 million in arrest, but they should be ashamed to say that because $500 million had no right to be in arrest in the first place.
Yeah.
And that was in 1 year. The year before, another $400 million. Every year is the same story. Every year. And to me, it requires the effort of all the unions coming together to sit down and plan how to collectively deal with this thing. It had to stop. It had to, because at the end of the day, you know what's happening? I hear of a woman who working in a security company. She gone for she maternity benefit, only to be told by NIB, well, you're not registered, you know. You're not registered. You know, when you do hear the show, the same security company don't even give you a pay slip. Seriously, them things are to stop, man.
And you know, it's mainly poor workers. It's mainly poor workers, you know, coming.
Yeah,
Ordinary.
it's poor workers. Yes, I agree with you, but you know, boy, listen. If I go to start to talk about this, and I think that will be our next story, right?
Well, what we could do, we could definitely, because this NIS thing is a serious, it's theft. It's theft, it's a scam, the breaking the law, and unless an employer make a jail for 6 months, I think they will continue to abuse it. They will continue to abuse it. And it's tragic. It's tragic.
Last month, the story broke out in the papers. A High Court judge ordered a security company to pay NIB $8 million in arrears, penalty, and interest. That is shameful and disgraceful.
But he should have made a jail, you know, come on.
Exactly.
Not pay the arrears, pay the arrears, yes, and make the jail. Because it have ordinary poor people making jail for all sorts of frivolous things.
You know, if a worker that borrow money from the employer or take the employer money and not paying back, you know what happened to
that worker would still be in remand yard.
Yeah. So it's one justice for them and next one for me. And on top of all of that, now they want to cut people NIS pension benefits by extending the retirement age from 60.
By extending the retirement age, correct.
Yeah, they say that if you retire, that is the report, that is the recommendation in the report tabled before Parliament. If you retire at age 60, right, for each year before age 65, your pension will be reduced by 6%. So age 60 is 30% reduction in your pension, including your minimum pension. Yeah. At age 61 is 24% reduction. They come in to cut people pension because they find that we getting too much money. That's what they say in the report.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's a whole, I tell you, it looks like we could start our next session right here, right now. Because, you know, it's this entire process. There seems to be a national campaign to take more and more and more from ordinary working people because somehow they felt that ordinary working people had too much. They really
Yes,
believe that, you know?
yes.
And but that is a topic for a whole
Let me give you the words that was used in the report. It is too generous.
ay, ay, ay.
That is the exact
Ah,
words. It is too $3,000 a month is
it's
too
too,
generous. It should be 80% of the minimum wage. That is the report.
well,
That is
Trinidad,
tabled in
yeah.
Parliament.
Well, what this tells us, comrade, um, again, your video, put back on your video,
Yeah.
comrade. What this tells us, comrade Allen, is that after so many decades of struggle, it is quite clear that there are current issues that ordinary working people are facing that really seeks to strip them of their humanity, okay? And it means, therefore, that those epic, the foundation laid by those warriors and those heroes that you mentioned earlier, we have to build on it because it's there. The beauty of having a powerful and strong history is that you have material to work with. So we have to build on that to continue an epic struggle in 2020, going straight into the future, because as we have identified, there's still a lot of injustice being meted out to ordinary working people as there is this attempt to strip ordinary working people of their dignity. Because why? Because $3,000 a month is generous. Because minimum wage seems to be generous. And that is how they see us, Plantation 2020. So I give you, just to say that next week we'll be interviewing another one of those T&TEC heroes, Comrade Harrison Thompson. So let me ask you to say some sort of last words, closing words. And I want you drawing on the spirit of our ancestors to talk to the workers of Trinidad and Tobago. Comrade.
Right. I come from the old school, the 1970s, 1960s. That's the school I come from. And whatever we used to do then, it reaped the results we wanted. I must say, now that I have opportunity to say so, let me say so. It hurt me down to the last part of my private parts that we weren't able to or didn't bring out all the troops when that refinery was being closed down and thousands of people were being put on the breadline. You know why? I learned from people like Scotty. Them tell me the story that when Shell wanted to retrench hundreds of workers and BP wanted to lick up over 1,000+ workers, right? The General Council take a decision. They go man to man and mobilize everybody to shut down the place. Not a man must go. And they were able to save hundreds of jobs. That, you see that kind of spirit? That kind of fighting spirit, a blow to one is a blow to all. That is what made our union what it has been. That is what made unions feared by employers, the ability to shut down production. Right? We have to build back that spirit. We have to build back that solidarity. What affected us, remember, is one struggle we are in, you know. We mustn't be fighting by ourselves. We have to learn how to link up our struggles with each other, how to give support to each other. That is the basis of all trade unionism. If we don't do that, well, we might as well close up shop, because that is where our strength lies, in solidarity. And my part in wish is to see that reignited. Thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for this very powerful and inspirational talk. It went far deeper than I even anticipated. It was a lot more powerful and more inspirational than I expected. It really went way beyond my expectations. And I'm sure to the listening audience who would have been tuning into this program would share my sentiments. I really want to say to you, Comrade Allen, and this is now very personal. I really want to thank you because, you see, for young people like myself, notwithstanding my beard, I may look a little older than you now with my beard. The truth is that we have to draw on the strength, spirit, and vision that you all had, because you all are an inspiration to people like myself and there are other young trade unionists. You may not know it, comrade, but there are many young trade unionists who look up to you all. And I think sharing your thoughts, sharing your stories with Trinidad and Tobago through this platform will really open up the opportunity for workers across the board, to truly appreciate the value of solidarity, the value of solidarity. They can only win us if they divide us. That's what they did during slavery. That's what they did during indentureship. But we overcame these things because of solidarity. We overcame colonialism because of solidarity. We laid the foundations of independence because of solidarity. We were able to nationalize and own the commanding heights of the economy because of solidarity. There is no substitution for our class consciousness, looking out for each other, struggling with each other, fighting for each other. And that is the legacy that you all have left, comrade. So I thank you as we close off this special edition of Take a Stand for Trinidad and Tobago, drawing on the legacy of those T&TEC workers that took a stand for Trinidad and Tobago throughout the 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s. Thank you, comrade.
Thank you very much, and God bless.
Thank you, and thanks to our listening audience. Everyone have a safe afternoon until we meet again next week.